Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into one of life's biggest, most profound experiences, death. But we're going to look at it through a very specific lens, a Christian sermon. We're going to really unpack its theological view of mortality, from where it all started to what it all means in the end.
What's so interesting is that the sermon doesn't kick off with some lofty scripture. Nope, it starts right here with this really raw personal memory. It's such a powerful way to begin because it grounds this huge abstract topic in an experience we can all understand, that first kind of confusing brush with loss that totally shapes how you see the world.
Okay, so here's the game plan for our journey today. We'll start with that raw personal encounter with death, then we're going to trace its theological roots all the way back to Adam. After that, we'll get into what the sermon calls the disease of death, explore the deep pain of separation, and then, and this is key, we'll look at the promise of new life. Let's dive right in.
So, first things first, the sermon just establishes a baseline reality. It's not trying to be philosophical here. It's trying to frame death as this tangible, absolutely unavoidable force in all of our lives.
And this right here, this is the foundational claim. In a world full of gray areas and uncertainties, death is presented as the one undeniable truth. It's the one event that forces every single one of us to face reality head-on, whether we feel ready for it or not.
So if death is this core unavoidable reality, the sermon then has to ask a pretty fundamental question. Where did it even come from? And for that answer, it turns right to the biblical story of Adam. I mean, think about that for a second. It's a really striking way to frame him. He's not just the first man. He's presented as the first person to experience this earth-shattering sorrow. In this view, he's the ground zero for all human suffering, the first one to watch death crash into a world that, well, just wasn't built for it.
Now, what's so fascinating here is how the sermon describes Adam's punishment. It wasn't just some one-and-done thunderbolt from the sky. No, it was this long, agonizing education. He was made to live for centuries, forced to witness the entire terrible domino effect of his choice. The spiritual ache of being cut off from God, the absolute horror of seeing his son Abel murdered by his brother Cain, the shock of sickness entering his family, the new pain of childbirth for his wife, and maybe worst of all, the relentless grief of outliving every single one of his children.
Okay, so we've got the origin story. Now the sermon shifts gears to define the very nature of death itself. And it doesn't use a biological definition. Instead, it uses this really powerful theological metaphor.
And this is the core metaphor. This is a real game changer. By calling death a disease, the sermon completely reframes it. It's not a natural part of life's cycle anymore. It's an unnatural affliction, a sickness that all of humanity is suffering from. And when you think of something as a disease, you immediately start looking for a cure.
So the crucial point here, the thing you've got to get, is that death is framed as this unnatural intruder. It's seen as a disease that needs a cure, a punishment that was earned, and maybe most importantly, a painful separation that goes completely against God's original plan for a world built on connection and life.
And this leads to a really subtle but super important part of the argument. The sermon makes a sharp distinction between the final event of death and the ongoing experience of separation. Just look at this comparison for a second. On one side, you have death, it's final, it's an event. But on the other side, you have separation, which is described as this continuous, ongoing sorrow. The sermon makes the case that this sorrow, being cut off from God, which was Adam's very first punishment, can actually be a deeper and more profound kind of suffering than death itself.
So after diagnosing this disease of death and digging into the pain of separation, the sermon naturally pivots. If that's the problem, what's the solution? This is where the whole thing shifts to its core message of hope.
This right here is the central analogy for that hope. In this view, physical death isn't the end of the story. It's more like planting a seed. The act of burial isn't about destruction. It's about sowing the potential for a completely new and transformed life to spring up.
And this is what that hope is built on. The sermon explains that the reason death isn't the end is because of the resurrection of Jesus. That event is presented as the ultimate proof that death can be beaten. And it's also the promise that believers, too, will get a new body and a new kind of life after they die.
So, you see, this promise of a future life gives incredible meaning to our life right now. According to the sermon, our time here on earth isn't just about waiting around for the inevitable. It's an active opportunity to build a relationship with God. And that relationship, well, that's framed as the ultimate purpose of life.
And this is where we're left.
with a question the sermon says King David asked. After this huge theological journey, the message becomes personal again. It's a really provocative question that leaves the audience to think not just about the sermon's answers, but about their own mortality. It brings it all home. What will my end be like?